Brian Gaines' first draft is in the book. So, which player will have the biggest impact this season? Back with Matt and Seth. Okay, guys, there's the question. Tell me, Seth, who's going to have the biggest impact?
This is an easy one for me. It's one Justin Reed out of Stanford, and I'm not just picking him because he was the first guy they picked. This is a guy that very easily could have gone a lot higher, and it was because he can step in and play immediately because he's that smart of a player. And we know something that Romeo Crennel loves. He loves versatile defensive backs. He can play slot corner. He can play safety. He can play up in the box like a linebacker. He can blitz. He can do all these things. He's just too valuable, and he's got too much potential not to use him. I don't know if he starts right away, but Romeo Crennel will use him right away. Who you got,
all right,
Matt?
okay, so my pick is, let me see. Seth, that was a great pick. In fact, I'm going to back you up on that. This guy has a cover ability. He can play over the top. He can go play one-on-one defense. And the scouts say, if you watch this guy the way he plays, he studies the game. Yes, he's smart. Yes, he went to Stanford, but he studies the game. And oh, by the way, he had a great brother, Eric Reed. Yeah, the bloodlines are there, the academics are there. This guy's going to be an impact player for the Texans.
Is it wrong that I'm not going Justin
No,
Reed? No, it's
no.
not. I'm going to go
Kiki
Cute. I don't hate Stanford. Kiki Cutie. That's who I'm going with. He is, of course, the wide receiver and the kick returner from Texas Tech. Maybe the fastest man in college football. So when you consider wide receiver spot and kick returning, to me, that's double the chance of having an impact on the field. And if this guy produces like, I don't know, Wes Welker, boy, you've got a player that can make a very big impact, and that is certainly why the Texans selected him. Now that Brian Gaines' first draft is in the books, what are our impressions of this draft? Granted, I know it's a very small sample size, but what do you think now that it's done?
Look, it's tough when you don't have a first and second round pick. There's a tendency not to get all that excited about it. I think there's one thing that I saw out of Brian Gaines. Rick Smith sometimes had a tendency in the third, fourth, and fifth rounds to go for physical potential more than actual playing ability or resume, which is fine. I mean, that yields you some really good players at times. I saw Brian Gaines go after players that had a certain amount of polish to them. And I look at all three of those guys in the third round, and I don't think any one of them is a project. I mean, the tight end needs to work on his blocking, but I think all three of those guys could play in year one.
I just get such a different vibe with Brian Gaines being the GM. It's so different than when Rick Smith was the GM. You would see Rick Smith on one end of the field, Bill O'Brien at the other. When we went to the Senior Bowl and spent a week with those guys, they were constantly talking. They were constantly talking. When Brian was over, he was getting Bill's attention. He would walk over after a practice play. They would talk about it. I love the communication. I love the vibe I get from this. I hope it continues through free agency. And now we have the draft, and now more free agents being signed. I love what's happening so far.
Well, I think Brian Gaines really did what he set out to do. He had basically laid out this plan that we're going to stress speed, we're going to stress athleticism, and we're going to stress versatility. And I think if you look at these draft picks, all those guys, for the most part, check all those boxes.
Yeah, and look, this is what you do after every draft. Everybody in the league's getting B pluses and A minuses. I think what you talked about, the cohesion and Brian Gaines and Bill O'Brien being on board together. A lot of times, what does NFL teams in isn't that you don't have a smart GM and a smart head coach and a smart owner. It's when all three of those guys aren't on the same page. I feel like maybe for the first time in a while, all three of those guys are on the same page.
I love it. And a playmaker with Reed. We talked about defense. And a playmaker, this young QT guy is a slot man. One more weapon for Deshaun Watson. I love this.
All right, weapons everywhere. How will they play? Which one will have the biggest impact? We shall see as we get closer and closer to the NFL season.